Please do.
Okay, so we've got the recording going. Make sure everybody is panelist that needs to be. Okay, so top of the hour. Welcome to the last OISF-Suricata webinar of 2021. Kind of hard to believe. I don't know where the year went. So today will be a little bit different. We're just going to try to do things quite a bit more unscripted. I went in with an absolutely zero slide mentality, so I don't have any PowerPoint, not even a set of presentation ones. We plan on talking for roughly an hour, 45 minutes an hour, but we could go a little bit longer. The session will be recorded, so if there is any need to drop off early, please feel free to do so. We'll get the video posted to our YouTube channel, as you see here. We do have the chat, so trying a couple things new today. We'll have, of course, the chat that's normal with Zoom. We'll have the Q&A. If you want to use the Q&A, that's a little bit easier to keep track of questions. And then we've set up a Discord server to be a little bit more part of the permanent experience. So I've also in the Zoom chat posted a link to Discord, and there is a webinars live chat channel that you can join. The idea behind that is that any conversations that we have here will stick around a little bit longer. With the Zoom chats, those go away once we end the session. So again, welcome. My name is Josh Stroschein, Director of Training for OISF. I've been with OISF now for a few years and work on all things training, workshops, events, and everything of that like. Joining me today is Peter Manev. He'll be taking over about halfway through. Peter, I don't know if you want to say anything about yourself as we're getting started here.
Yeah, hi folks, welcome. Thank you very much for joining us. My name is Peter Maniff. I'm part of the Suricata team. Been working with Josh on a few webinars and trainings this year, and been very happy and always on a learning curve inside the Suricata team. Actually, we thought with Josh it would be a cool idea to do something, a webinar like that, when we actually try to mimic a little bit what we do sometimes during the day. So hopefully, we're always on a search for something new, something more interesting, or just to figure out what's out there when we have time in between the meetings and similar things. I'm sure you're all aware of how that goes. So we thought it would be good to just show part of some routines that we do, and quite often so with Josh, actually. So looking forward to it. Josh is spinning up some pretty nice coding experience there, so I'm looking forward to that too. Back to you, sir.
Okay, great. All right, well then I'll almost going to kick things off here. I'll start talking a little bit about some tools and some approach. Again, if you have questions, please feel free to use the chat here, and I'll be trying to keep an eye on kind of all of the things that are open. Before I do that, though, just a couple of small announcements. Again, the Suricata project is supported by the OISF, the Open Information Security Foundation. This is a 501c3 founded in the United States, so nonprofit. Provides for all of the support that goes into all of us that work part-time, full-time, contractual with Suricata to keep it the latest and greatest and on the cutting edge. So, please take a look at the page if you're interested in getting more involved with supporting the project. This is where you'll find information as well as who to reach out to contact. Kelly is our executive director. I'm certainly happy to field any questions questions. And if I don't know, I'll put you in the right direction. When it comes to events, the Suricata website, suricata.io. So we got a new domain, suricata.io, and a new logo, as you can see here in the page, as well as OISF. I didn't point that out. New logos here as well. Those are on the new shirts that you would have got at Suricon if you would have made it. So you can go to the homepage and scroll down a little bit. You'll see all of our events get posted here. Webinars, presentations, workshops. We've got some training events coming up here in early 22 that'll be combination in person and hybrid and online, so hybrid events. So all of that will be posted here. You can also find it in the main navigation. Thank you, Aaron. Under Learn, we'll have an events tab that'll take you to a page and give you similar information. Of course, we post all of this information in our discourse or our forums in Discord, on social media, predominantly Twitter and LinkedIn. So you can also follow us there in order to find the latest and greatest. Okay, so with announcements out, let's just jump in here and talk a little bit about finding and identifying different threats, unknown threats. So I became quite interested in finding, threats as I saw other researchers doing online. And one of the ways in which I wanted to do that was with, limited data, with public, public information, public threat feeds that everybody has access to, that everybody can contribute to. I do some contract work for HP, and even though I'm a part of a threat research team there, I don't have access to, as a contractor, I don't have access to any of the internal data. So I don't sit in a privileged position where I get to see all of the telemetry coming in from all of the different HP appliances that are out there. So I kind of tackled this with, again, using those same resources that we all have access to. So everything that you're going to see here is coming from public or open source different feeds and platforms. Probably the biggest is the URL house from AbuseCH, one of the many AbuseCH projects. And if you're not using that platform, I would encourage you to check it out. It's really become the center point of a lot of my research activity. So many thanks to that project, and definitely check it out. So one of the facets of this was open directories. I got really interested in open directories because of the opportunity that they present themselves in order to collect additional information and to find things like tools and phishing kits and just all sorts of content. To my surprise, there are a lot of open directories out there, and finding those open directories became an interesting area. You could do, I started just kind of fumbling around looking for them manually, as that didn't scale well, of course. I kind of set out to make some tools. And after, I don't know, several months, about a year, started collaborating with a colleague at HP, and we kind of helped me take it to the next level. And so together we created Subcrawl, not inspired by PubCrawl, although maybe the two are more related than I'd like to think.
Actually,
yeah. I'm not good at naming, but Subcrawl was just to take my initial Python, because you do security research, you hack something together in Python, it's easy. It was to take that and make a bit more of a mature framework. So we released this, at least, and by release I mean we got it to a point where we were comfortable enough with the code to make it public late this summer. There are a couple of presentations, so I won't spend too much time on it. If you want to check those out with both Black Hat and with Virus Bulletin. But the idea behind the framework is that it's an automated way of feeding a tool URLs, taking those URLs, essentially generating new content. So if I have a URL that's evil.com/path1/path2/path3, and then maybe some resource, to chop all of those subdirectories up so that I have distinct URLs. Because I found in my manual research that sometimes there'll be an open directory at /path1, path2, path3, not at path2, and then again at path1. So it was worth exploring it in a little bit more detail, and then feeding that into an engine and starting to crawl those sites. When an open directory is found, typically through the index of title, to harvest all the URLs that are there, put them back in a queue, and then continue to crawl. Because we're making the request, we're getting the response content, and then we can parse the headers, and we can, more importantly, identify the content using things like libmagic and Yara rules. So we can identify interesting payloads, executable files, or zip files, and then through Yara rules, identify any content like web shells. All of that data then is processed, and we put it into a storage module. We have sort of this one-shot mode that allows you to dump the content to the console. We have a service mode that can store it in MISP. I'm actually working on an integration with Elastic, and so that's also an opportunity, and we'll take a look at that here in just a minute. So that's all of it. Fairly good documentation, although I'm sure it could use some work. But if you want to check out the project and just how to get up and running, we have Dockerized it, so it's pretty easy to get up and running with it. I
was going to say, Josh, because often enough we especially with you, I think we chat a lot about have you seen this new malware, this new executable or binary or whatever, that zip, what does it do next, after it's getting detonated and things like that. And as you say, at least for me, from Suricata's perspective, it's always interesting to find out, okay, so what does it do after that? How does it behave on the network level? And it's always tough to find, as you said, data or pickups to see how it does it, unless you, of course, you have a sandboxing environment and all that stuff. But often enough, we talk a lot about. I say often enough, but at least like 5 times a week, we talk often enough about these detonation and pickup. So I'm super happy for subcrawl, to be very honest, because it automates a lot of stuff. So we can just go on the prol and see what happens after we find some stuff on the network and things like that. So yeah, sorry to jump in. I just want to say a pretty cool project.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, and that's a good point. If I didn't make you do a good job of setting the stage, that'll be the kind of the second part of this is once we find something interesting, what do we do with it? How do we identify anything interesting from it? And so that'll be the next part. Again, I'm not going to get into all the functionality here, but certainly part of the framework is the ability to save content that it finds or save content that you want it to. For example, save all the PE files, and then you could have something else come along, pick those up, drop them in a sandbox for you, and try to automate it. So, again, I had kind of two things in mind when we started building this framework out a little bit more robustly. Is that service mode, we want long-term analysis, dropping data into Elastic or dropping it into MISP. Or we want sort of a one-shot mode, and that maybe we just have a couple of hosts we want to investigate real quickly. You found something on Twitter, InfoSec Twitter is alive and well. Kind of a weird venue for all of us researchers to convene on, but it definitely works. And so, or you're doing a pen test maybe, and you just got a limited set of hosts or something, and you're looking for open doors. There are some other projects. Of course, that's always a question. Why don't you just use something else? And I just didn't find they worked the way that I wanted them to. They didn't discover the content that I was discovering manually as I was doing some comparison. So we talked about URLs. URLs is what drives this. So what better place than the URL house? They have a fully and well-documented API. So again, you can check those out if you haven't used that before. This is a real simple curl command. We send a tag to the API. And one thing that I greatly appreciate with the URL house is that they have signatures and tags. And so they do a pretty good job of taking the URLs and trying to provide very concise information about that URL, the signature of the malware family that it's dropping, and then any tags that go along with that. So, there's less ambiguity in what you're looking at if you find it on the URL house. So tag Kyoto, surprise, if Log4j wasn't bad enough, Emotet came back. And so lots of surprises here at the end of the year. So we can look for those URLs that have been tagged by Kyoto. And of course, any tag that you can think of, any tag that's going to be available in their system. This will return quite a bit of JSON. It returns the full record of information for each URL, which is quite extensive. It's in JSON. So we'll pipe that JSON through to JQ and use JQ as a command line utility to grep out or JQ out to filter out just the URL. It has double quotes around it. I'm lazy, I guess, and I didn't create the framework to account for those. So I'm just going to simply replace those. And then I'm going to drop those into a file, which I usually just name for my own convention .urls. Give it a second here. Of course, when I do any sort of crawling, I'm always very careful because I don't want to reveal my residential IP as I do most of my research from home. So typically log into a system that's a VPS somewhere that I'm paying a few bucks a month for, or in this case, I have some servers that I run from home, and they're segmented on my network, and then they connect through a VPN tunnel.
Can never be too careful there, to be very honest,
Yeah, you never can be too careful. Look at this content. You'll see here's just a quick sanity check. What are the URLs? And these are always interesting to see. If we were to grab, let's just do that real quick. See if this has changed. So I'm going to grab tags, anything that was tagged from Dridex. And you'll see with these Emotet, a lot of these are probably legitimate hosts that have been compromised, and that's sort of their theme and a very common theme. How they're compromised is a whole other interesting area that maybe we could talk about. That was part of the reason I mentioned web shells earlier. I started finding and tracking web shells, and if we have time, I'll be happy to talk about those. But a lot of this infrastructure is going to be compromised, at least for this first stage, the initial delivery of the Office documents, or the initial delivery of kind of the first stage of malware, the loader. If we look at Dridex, though, you'll notice that they have shifted recently to using like no kidding CDNs. So Discord app actually using no kidding Discord and OneDrive. And that's interesting just because of the fact that they're using legitimate services and they have been using them. I apologize for the language here, but they're I guess like a little bit angry at researchers or something. But then they're also, like I don't find open directories very often with these actual CDNs, and so that changes as well. It's made it a little bit harder to track things like web shells and to discover content related to this infrastructure that they're using because these CDNs just aren't open.
Looks like a lot of video at .mp4 and kind of trending that, at least from that page of URLs and all that, which is kind of interesting.
Yeah. Well, and we'll see here in just a minute. Of course, the resource URL URI doesn't really matter. .mp4 is probably a PE file.
Yeah.
Okay, so in order to start crawling, of course, you'll see the documentation. We got the subcrawl.py. We define the payload processing. So, we had that diagram of the framework as it collects response content from the URLs that it scrapes. Then that content is handed off to these processing modules. Very easy to define custom modules, and then we've got a handful already there. So payload processing just identifies content by libmagic. Yara, of course, just applies Yara rules to, Yara rule to the content as well. Storage modules, I'm going to use my Elastic storage. It's not in the main branch yet, but it is on its own branch. If you want to check that out, I'm working on just a few last minute tweaks before I commit that. And then -F is the file mode, kind of one shot. So read URLs from this file and then start running. There is a config. So jumping around a little bit, going into the project inside of Visual Studio, there is this amongst many options here in the config.yaml. Let's see. There is a log level, and I think I had that on info. Yeah, I did. I just wanted to make sure that wasn't on debug because debug gets to be pretty verbose. So kind of your common log levels, debug info, warn, error, and then we have appropriate messaging logging in the framework to help with that. Many other things in here to tweak. Most of it is hopefully fairly self-explanatory by looking at the kind of key value pair. Okay, there we go. So now we can start crawling. Error reading input file. Okay, so what did I do? Subcrawl. It's not plural, so couldn't find the file. Nope. And let me guess, URLs. Oh, that's doing debug stuff, so hold on a second. Oh yeah, that's right. I have a local instance in this VM, and then I also have one here. I'm actually SSH'd onto a different machine in order to do the scanning. 9 times out of 10, when something doesn't work the way I expect, it's because of me. There we go. Okay, so again, debug gets really verbose as it shows all the URLs that it's finding and scraping, and so it can get just to be a lot to follow, especially when you've got the screen here with a fairly high resolution. So here we go. We start scanning. Again, typically, if you're seeing results at this point, it's because it did find an open directory. For example, this payload that was found, this right here, it says, hey, there's a document, an Office document at this location, which means let's remove that and that last part of that subdirectory, part of the path. Then this is an open directory.
Have a look
so
what else is in there. All right, cool. That's a good find.
And so this is great because now we have access to kind of navigate through here. Again, you find a lot of these sites, let's say it's a compromised WordPress. This looks like it's teen bikini guide. Yeah, we're going to stay away from going any further on this site. It looks like it's a WordPress site, WP dash, and so with those, there's oftentimes a lot of content, and so I got tired of looking at all of this manually, trying to make sense of it, and so subcrawl, that's the main purpose here, is to find directories like this, to find this content, and then to parse through it and tell me what's interesting here. Of course, when you identify files, this like wsegovia316.php, this is interesting in that it's just such a weird convention. I don't claim to know all of the pages that are in a WordPress site because there's thousands of them, but that just seems odd. And it could be a web shell, it could be something that they put custom, it could be part of maybe a plugin or something. Certainly something that appears to not be working. And because it's a PHP file, we can't really make any sense of it because the request is made, the server interprets the PHP, and we only get the response back. So in this case, we're only getting a few deprecated info warning type messages. So a lot of good content here. Again, most of it's probably legit WordPress, and so it's just not of any real interest or value. This was our original path that I chopped off, and you'll see that with those, with this particular actor, there's something in there. There's an index.php or a handler that's going to grab our request, and then it's making determination on what content to respond with. So here it's giving us a download file type. We know this is already going to be a sheet, a spreadsheet, looks like a spreadsheet anyway, an Office doc, an XLM, so a macro enabled Office doc, which no doubt is going to drop our Emotet malware. So if we weren't sure if this was a brand new discovery, right, and the URLs kind of takes away some of the excitement because we pulled all these URLs with the tag Emotet, Kyoto, and now we find something. This has probably been reported. I mean, that's probably the first thing I would do. Let's copy this link. We can go back to the URL house with that and search for it. And if not, then we could take that content, we could download it, and then we could drop it into a sandbox, which we'll do. Oh yeah, look at that. It's not been reported.
It's actually pretty cool. Because actually, even if it's reported, just to be very honest, it's been reported, but actually you don't know how it looks, how it works, and what are the mechanics about it. You can have an idea and all that, but it's always interesting to get something that it's not super in terms of traffic or how it works. It's not docked or available anywhere. So that's the cool part about it. That's what sometimes we dig with Josh at night.
Yeah. Sit down. You think you're going to go to bed, and then it's like, I'll just see what interesting threats I can find.
Let me look at this one just once.
Yeah.
And then 4 a.m.
hours later. Right. So I use AnyRun. They're a great platform. AnyRun and Triage are probably my two go-to. I'm free tier all the way right at this point. So, with samples like these, once they're uploaded, they're going to be publicly available. That's the deal, but that's good because we want this information out there for the community to have. You can see already tagged it as Emotet. So they've got some signatures in there that have detected that. And if we're looking for threats, the threats tab here is going to be alerts from Suricata. One thing I really like about AnyRun is that they populate this data in real time. Some of the other sandboxes, you have to wait for the analysis to complete before you see the report. But with AnyRun, it's all coming in real time. So I really like that. Here we have our DNS requests. You can see definitely some interesting domains, but it looks like they're maybe having some IP resolution issues, and we haven't seen a next stage drop. So we haven't seen that request yet to download the next stage, which generally speaking is going to be the Emotet, the actual executable.
Can always be a case though when maybe it's killed off or sync halt or something like that. You can always have to have that in mind as well, I think.
Yeah, and and if you don't get the payload, then it can limit your analysis. In this case, we're fortunate because AnyRun is saying that this is Emotet, so pretty strong. You look enough at these different artifacts too, you probably can open them up. In this case, you look at the macros, you'll recognize how Emotet's been obfuscating and structuring their macros. So you might be able to recognize it just based off of that. But sometimes that's not enough, and you do actually have to get the payloads. And if those don't come in, then you can be left with a question mark as to what did that Office document actually try to drop. Everything works in stages and phases, and usually the Office document is just a downloader. It's just going to go download the next stage. So it's only a small important part, but a small part of the story. So okay, so no payloads there. That's no problem.
And just to piggyback on what you said, Josh, so all these public services that offer the sandboxing, unless you have your own private sandboxing full-blown environment, they just show a certain stage. And in a lot of cases, that malware might not even activate just because, I don't know, you might detect that it's not on the correct operating system, might detect that the user doesn't have enough privileges for it to work on forward. You might detect that it's on a VM machine. There's a lot of, you might detect that it's not an Active Directory. So there's a lot of ifs and those. It's not necessarily true that you'll always detonate, always do. And this is part of the whole process, of the whole, kill chain process, if you will, how the malware escalates or propagates entirely in the organization. So we're looking at a subsection here in that, but it's still nice to find and understand how they function and how they work. Yeah, I think it's a pretty cool subject, honestly. Back to you, sir. Sorry.
Yes. So here's another one. I just, since it popped up, protected web shells. You can see here it is. This is the open directory, and this module ajax.php. Yeah, the name maybe looks like it could fit into a proper framework or content management system. The content, though, when we look at that, we're going to be presented with here is this is evidence of a web shell. In this case, it's password protected. So we don't have the password. Even if we did, I don't know, probably a gray area if you should log into it or not. I'll leave that up to you.
Maybe if you type in your social security in there, I'm just
that's probably the last thing I would do. Sometimes you do find open web shells, certainly, and again, it's maybe a gray area, so it's up to you to decide if you were to use those. Of course, the value in finding an open web shell is now you essentially have the same shell access on that server. So these different directories where we're just getting XML documents or Excel documents, now we can look inside there. We can grab the PHP code. We can understand a little bit more about how things are set up and the stages. The content, though, even though this is very minimal, what's interesting with this content is that if you hash the content and just straight hash, like I just generate a SHA-256, that's enough to track it and find related web shells, and maybe you can make some correlations on the different threat actors and how they're using those. Here is the very, very rough dashboard that I've been working on. You'll see that it has basic stats on the top and content type, kind of counters, how many PEs have I found, how many zips have I found. Down below then is just a listing of that content. So here's an easier way to see those zips as they're being logged. Below that is the executable files. Here are my web shells. Let me refresh this page. I'm moving slow today. There we go. Get rid of that filter. I don't need that right now. And here we go. So down in the lower left, this is my web shell window. There's the SHA-256, and you'll see that the same shell is on this host many times. Just keep an idea here that the 9FA, if we scroll down a little bit, you'll see this shell is actually on several hosts. We can just filter on that real quick. So there we go. A couple different hosts. I think there was 2 or 3 that it's on. And so there's a connection here somehow based off of that web shell. So again, even with limited information, I think there's interesting things that we can do with that.
So basically, Josh, if you want just to recap, so the response here hashed served by different hosts. Would you say that's the same kind of malware, or you say this is just a coincidence out of your experience
That's
so far?
Yeah, that's just a URL scan.io. That's just the web shell. So that's more for I think the interesting thing with that is how is it being used? Are the shells there in a post setup of the website? I think we've got some pretty strong evidence that it's part of more of a supply chain issue. Projects on GitHub, for example, have already been backdoored, and so their access is essentially being installed when when those sites are being set up. So there's quite a bit of different options, but for the most part, it's the shell. It's how are they maintaining access to those compromised systems in order to add in the different content. So not necessarily, it's not part of the delivery directly. I should probably look at the questions here real quick.
Part of the whole chain, I guess.
How did I determine it was password protected? So password protected, there's going to be a prompt, authentication prompt. A lot of the shells I find right now are just a password field. Some of them are going to be username and password. But this is it. If it weren't, you would have, and I don't actually have a web shell I can show. Maybe I do. I can dig around. I probably have one sitting on this VM somewhere. But you would see a shell to that server. So that's how I find those. How effective are macro-enabled files for staging loading malware? They are still very effective because it's still one of the primary ways in which malware is delivered. Office documents. In fact, you look at Emotet, they're still largely their campaigns are driven by Office documents, Excel documents, and Word documents using VBA style macros or the old but new Excel 4 style. So they're still quite prevalent.
If may add, often enough, it's actually, even though it's true, yes, some corporate networks block most of it, but not all. And you have a lot of users that actually don't have that blocked or are using it because they are either super users or actually need to work as part of their daily job extensively with Excel and things like that. So a lot of times these things like that are enabled, actually. And they get through. It's not unusual, to be very honest. At least in my experience. And like Emotet came back. It was gone for 10 months or whatever the time was.
Yeah.
And then it was like, came back and it's still, and now it's trending to being one of the top threats again, even after being almost decapitated here at the beginning of this year. Was it, Josh?
Yeah, it was. It was I think January, late January of this year that there was some international law enforcement announced the takedown of what I thought was and probably was a key part of their organization. They came back just, oh, come on, what the heck? They came back. Came back hard.
Kind of rose from the ashes.
Trying to get this hash. I don't know why I can't get it. So anyways, I was going to show you can take that SHA and like search places like URL scan. That's going to have a much larger data set. And again, you'll be able to find more hosts that have that shell, which would then indicate that they've been compromised. So if I can get that copied, maybe Peter, I can come back to that later.
No problem.
So in doing some scanning again, just recently, I better get more to a more interesting use case here. Came across, where did I put that? No. There it is. So came across this one.
Files.
Yeah,
text files.
Yeah, just recently. Too. Although I didn't want to leave it to chance that my scanning would come across it today or just right now. So so subcrawl can continue to crawl and find and harvest content, and because I'm using Elastic, it'll persist into that database. But this one was interesting for a number of reasons. What caught my eye with this was all of the .txt extensions. So why so many text files? This is sitting in a /test directory, which sometimes that can provide some insight. Sometimes it's just gibberish or nonsense. The host itself is a dotted quad, so no domain. So you see plenty of these in terms of servers being set up to stage sort of these intermediary Office docs, Excel files, PowerShell scripts, and not associated with a domain. And so they all kind of look interesting. As we talked about earlier, the extension is really irrelevant here. This can represent any sort of content. So as long as the threat actors have the ability to request the content, how it's named is oftentimes there just to try to, so that you don't notice it when you're looking at your network traffic. So in IDS, like Suricata, if there's a rule, it doesn't necessarily alert because it doesn't match patterns in the rule set that you're running. With these, all the timestamps are, there's some pretty recent ones. Timestamps, of course, they could be spoofed, but in my experience, most of the times these are pretty accurate. So finding things that are of within the last 2 or 3 days means that there might be some recent staging activity, or these might be used in an actual campaign. Before I go any further, I usually check the URL house and see what's there. If anything's been found, anything's been reported. Doesn't look like it. So we found
a good point.
Yeah, we found something. I'm always excited with all the research that's being done out there when I can find and stumble across something that has not been reported.
To be very honest, like I mean, even if it's listed somewhere, it might have been updated by the time between being listed and we crawl it now, or we look at it now. So there's always something, the probability of something new to find, or an actor changes and similar things like that. So, but this is a Humdinger, I think, right? It's like not listed. So,
well, not listed in. Yeah, and there it could be not listed because there's nothing interesting here. These are recipes or something, or it could be something good. So, so again, that's sort of the first initial checks I do. If it were on the URL house and everything was tagged, I might do a diff just to see, maybe there's, like you said, Peter, maybe there's new content here that wasn't there before. The URL does a great job, but even some of their scraping, they don't get all the data. They don't find all the samples that are there. So so yeah, it certainly could be something different. There's quite a few text files. I don't really want to dig through all of them. Again, I'm kind of lazy, even though this is interesting stuff. So I usually start with the larger files. I figure if anything's going to be a PE file or some sort of executable content, typically our PE files are portable, executable. Those are going to be big. So I think let's go with this s1.txt. This will just show us the response here in the browser. It's not code, so we didn't get PHP script or anything to interpret. I guess it could have been, but in this case it wasn't.
Probably not a good idea to open that in your Office doc suite.
Yeah, right. So I'm using the Tor browser, just if you hadn't caught on that as well. I don't use Tor for, I use it for this sort of casual browsing. At times, I also use, I'm going to stop the crawler here. I also use links. So I might be on a system that's, a VPS somewhere or has a VPN behind it or in front of it, and use links to investigate things. But the Tor browser works pretty good here. So we get all this content. Now, this definitely is odd to see this staged here. Looking at the patterns, you can see that this is base 64 encoded. And if you don't recognize that, typically the limited character set, alphanumeric, so A through Z, upper and lowercase, 0 through 9, and then I think it's like / and equal signs. I think those are the only. The equal signs only show up at the end of a block padding. Since it's a block encoding mechanism, if the last block of data isn't 3 bytes, I believe, then it pads it with 1 or 2 equal signs. So those show up. So it's got the character set. Now, typically the equal signs show up at the end. There's equal signs at the beginning, which is a bit odd. And if we scroll down to the beginning, or I'm sorry, to the very bottom, these characters here actually look familiar due to the encoding. So let's just copy this, and I'm going to go to CyberChef and paste it in.
which by the way is an online free available tool and all that stuff. So
Yep.
if you haven't used it, a great quick thing to check right online.
Yeah, so I'm using, this is actually the VM I'm in is Remnix. It's a Linux distro that just has a bunch of malware and RE reverse engineering tools kind of pre-built. It's like a Kali, I suppose. It has the CyberChef that you could run locally. There's also the CyberChef online. So the basics, excuse me, CyberChef, we have an input window, and let me zoom this in a little bit. We have different operations, and those operations can be stringed together to form a recipe. The input then goes through each operation and becomes output and then input for the next operation. And then once all of your recipes are completed, you'll have something here at the very end. So this is saying, hey, this is not a valid byte array. Your base64 decoding didn't work. And that's because we probably had an issue with the reversal of characters, right? So if the padding is supposed to be at the end, but it looks like it's at the beginning, you know, a very, very thin layer of obfuscation. Well, one is the encoding itself. So we've now reversed it and decoded it, and you can see evidence of a PE file. The first 2 bytes being the MZ signature, then we have the DOS stub and the image NT header section, the PE section. So this is definitely a PE file. Had they not obfuscated this, if you've ever run an IDS like Suri, you'll know that there are several alerts that can be generated around the download of a PE file. So this simple thing avoids quite a few of those. Reversing it, excuse me, is also a way to just kind of defeat some of the automation. Identifying this as a base64, since it's reversed, if maybe you were doing something that was automated, it might fail like we just saw. So again, like visually we can look at it and go, well, that's silly. I know how to defeat this, but if it were automated, it might be actually quite effective. So reversing it from base64, there's our file. We could do things like the magic. I think that'll show us the lib magic, although we can recognize the output type.
Yeah, it's pretty obvious that this is an executable.
Recursion. Okay.
Actually, what is interesting here is that it was base64 encoded content and reversed and all that. So it's very tough for file type magic to tell you what that is, unless it's like deobfuscated and done properly, like Josh did here in front of the screen.
Yeah. Okay, so now we can get the content. If we didn't want to download that, we could hash it. So SHA-2, that would should give us the SHA-2 of that, or there's 512. So again, whatever we want, we could take that. We could search for this file on a Malware Bazaar or URL House, VirusTotal, any place you could think of. If you don't want to handle the file itself, you just want to deal with. And I mean, you kind of have already handled it by pasting that base64 payload, but you know, we're kind of going to the next step when we actually download it and save it. Let's see, where did I just download that to? Right there, it looks like. So there's the download.exe. Next steps, very similar to what we just did. You know, again, depending on my level of comfort with research, you know, this is all public stuff that we're harvesting from. So I wanted to just use public platforms like AnyRun. Not a problem, or maybe Triage. Let's actually just use both of these. But if we were more concerned about maybe this is you know, something you found in your own environments, you might be a little bit more concerned about putting those things that you're finding in your own environments on a public platform. OPSEC reasons, revealing that you're investigating them. Maybe there's something inside the malware that's unique to your environment. There's a lot of reasons that you might hold off. So we'll drop that into AnyRun. And we'll put this into Triage as well.
So putting it in a couple of public boxes so that actually anybody can look at the reports and even take the pcap data and research that later as well if needed and all that, which is pretty useful, to be very honest.
Yeah, very useful. And you know, every sandbox is a little bit different. There's different benefits and capabilities. There's different anti-analysis that they use, and so you know, sometimes it's just you just get a different perspective. I'm even running my own cuckoo still. I need to switch. Cape is probably certainly the more maintained fork of Cuckoo at this point. But even this, I'll drop it into my own Cuckoo, and I'm not going to do that today just because time. But
and
okay.
don't get discouraged if there's no
go.
results right away. But here we have a few hits, of course. But sometimes they stay dormant on purpose for more than an hour or 5 hours or a day, even similar things. So, but this one is a good find here. All right.
Yeah. So you're going to be limited with sandboxes. You're typically limited on time. With any run, you can manually increase the time up to 5 minutes. So maybe that's worth upping the time. With Triage just manages its own timing. Not entirely sure how they do that. So all you can really do is drop and wait. Here we can see right away we're getting real-time alerts. So a variant delf.bll variant CNC activity. I've never seen that. But certainly if we're getting any sort of command and control type activity alerts, we're probably dealing with something bad. What is it though, is maybe still the question that we're trying to answer. And not only that, but then what else do we have here? Is there anything else worth investigating? And we have other files that we could continue this process on and in order to try to identify other interesting things. For the sake of time, we won't do that. But we'll just let this continue. Of course, connections that we're making here, we haven't seen any HTTP requests, but it looks like we are seeing some connections to, is that our 91.241, 19?
Yeah, 1949.
19.113.
Oh, no, something else. Okay.
Yeah, so it's a different server. Interesting thing about AnyRun is that they also tag open doors. So sometimes when I'm bored, I just go to AnyRun. If I'm like got 5 minutes between Zooms, which is very rare, I might just open up AnyRun, filter on the open door tag and just manually investigate a few hosts. But looks like they've got some related infrastructure here.
Part of the same network, probably very close.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. Always interesting to just pop up and see if there's anything on those servers. If they've got one open door, they might have another unable to connect. So nothing promising there. The threats continue to come in. It looks like, though, it's all command and control activity. So a little different.
Successful detonation, though, so very cool.
Yeah. Now, when we look at hatching or triage, you can see up in the upper right here, we got like across the board 10s. So that's like a perfect score. And if we look at the reports, the static report, if we look at the overview, here we have Modi loader, bootkit, persistence, Suricata. So there was some alerts. I believe that's what it's saying, not the Suricata malware. And then we can look at the.
Yeah, I think the signatures were down below, actually.
Yeah, here we go.
These guys,
there's our variant. So we're already seeing those rights to the master boot record. And then, of course, any other behavioral activity that was observed here. So let's see. What file did I get? Yeah, swan.txt. Yeah, there we go.
I think I'm going to try to grab one of these PCAPs and see what happens if I speed
Yeah,
up
so the last thing,
Honestly.
and then I'll kick it over to Peter to take a look at the PCAPs. One of the last things that, well, let's see where the PCAP analysis goes, because we're, again, one of the things that we're trying to identify is the actual family. And maybe this is enough, this Modi loader. I'm not familiar with that one. I haven't run across that before. So, that looks like the family. We're getting some alerts that likely are related to that, and we could do a little more research, of course. Now I could take this information, kind of go back to the internet, do some research on the family. I don't think we saw any further hits but Trojan on the AnyRun, and then there's a couple other platforms that I'll use, but those are my last ditch efforts before I start actually analyzing artifacts, looking at the macros, looking at the executables. So, all right, Peter, you want to?
Yeah, sure. Thank you very much. So
screen share.
Yeah, I think I'm going to do that. So this is an abundance of material here, kind of to see what's up. You guys see my screen?
Looks good.
All right, cool. So I'll jump in. So part of these text files were actually obfuscated binaries in a way, and they're all coming from HTTPS directory. So it's an open directory with HTTPS. So when you sit on the network, usually these guys, they work in packs. Usually, not always, but usually, one downloads the other, downloads the third. There, because you cannot pack everything into one single Excel file or stage, it will get easily picked up by, let's say, by endpoint security and similar things. And part of my job, daily routines, that just like Josh, I like doing a lot fast in between meetings, and mostly at night because we were so quiet back down then. And is actually to know, understand what Suricata can do and cannot do. And that includes not only QA but also research and similar things. So it's always very interesting to me. See what we can tell on the network. Of course, we cannot tell everything, but let's just have a look and see what we can tell. So this obfuscated binary that Josh found with the subcode. So, for example, this cannot just be straight away executed. Something needs to download this, convert it to an executable, and then run it. With a simple click on the URL, it's not going to happen. It needs help to get stage. So it's probably a second, third stage, whatever that stage might be in. So usually that's how they function, just in different stages. And so so when I just grab that pcamp, I usually, a lot of times, as I mentioned, I just want something really fast to spin up, have a look what the data is, so I have a quick research and then shut down the system. And what I use very often, actually, almost on a daily routine, without exaggeration, is actually the self-some Docker, because I can spin that up on any Linux host. It doesn't matter. So it's just a basic Docker compose. So exactly those 4 commands in here will get you going, as easy as that. On any Linux machine, Debian, Ubuntu, CentOS, Red Hat, whatever that is, no problem whatsoever. So exactly these 4 commands will get you that going. It's exactly what I'll try to do in here. Here I have it already downloaded. What I'm going to do is actually, I'm going to try to spin it up. And so actually, this is my command. Basically, what I'm saying is, I'm just going to time it. I'm going to do, I'm going to let it run, of course, but I'm going to do, and here it's going to do its job. So I wouldn't pull containers because I already have them. It's going to be non-interactive setup because I've already wanted to use that interface for sniffing. I'm going to give Elasticsearch 4 gigs of memory just because it's a small pcap. I just want to see what it is, and that's plenty. It's not for production or anything like that we need to set up a proper, much more memory.
Only 4 gigs, Peter. You're only 4 gigs. You're really living on the edge.
Come on,
I like.
Yeah, come on.
I too like to live dangerously.
Yeah, on the edge. And so, like, I mean, anybody can do it with 64. So how about 4? So again, this is not recommended for 4 gigabytes for production, of course, but for a small research and lookup of pickup data, it's awesome, because actually all I can do is just run this command, and I don't need to spin up VM, copy, import files, and similar things. So I actually downloaded this file here. So I'm saying it just starts a very minimalistic setup. Docker Compose app, just give 60 seconds for, usually the database Elasticsearch Docker Compose need that time to spin up, and then just do a simple replay of that pickup. And what this is going to do is basically, I've downloaded that pickup, as I said, and this is going to replay the pickup. And what this will give me actually back then is basically, Selx is composed of different open source tools that rely entirely on data from Suricata. And this is exactly what I want to have, just the data that Suricata produces, nothing else. So we have a few containers in there, as you can see, of course, the elk stack. And of course, we're pulling 7.16.1 because of the log4j bug that was fixed by elk. So we pulled the latest in here. And so we got the elk stack in here. We have an Nginx just kind of for authorization Docker. We got Evebox and Suricata Docker containers, which are actually maintained by Jason Nitch, one of our team members from Suricata team. Very thankful for that. And we got Sirius, which is an open source like hunting tool for Suricata and all data that it produces, and also a graphical rule set manager. So I got all these packed in here. Again, Docker Compose app, and it will do the whole setup. As you can see here, it just spins up in 44 seconds. And if you need to pull and download the Dockers, depending on connection, it could be inside 1-2 minutes. So literally, as I'm doing that now, it takes less than 3-4 minutes to spin the whole thing up, even if you don't have the Dockers. The Dockers downloaded. So this will spin them up. Just wait for all of them to start correctly and replay that pcap. And if I have it once up and running, I can just replay any pcap, set it, and then just shut it down. And actually, that's it. We're done just in those 2 minutes that I was explaining what it will do. 2-3 minutes. We're all done. So let me go ahead. I'm just gonna spin up here localhost. As you see, that just sets up everything for me. I don't need to do anything. I just need to log in. So for the Selks Docker version, as I said, Selks user is the password to get in. And first, I have the Sirius management interface, but I got all my tooling in here. Okay, see, there's some alerts generated in there. Now I'll dive into that in a second. But I'm looking at this here. So okay, I get my hunting tool. I had the management. I had some Kibana stuff here and Eve box. So again, I have my arsenal here just to see all the data that Suricata produces. Suricata doesn't just do alerts; it does a lot more things than that. In a lot of cases, they may not even be alerts because it's something new, but there will be traffic. So at some point, they will need to connect back and talk. They cannot just stay inside. They have to pull command or contact the C2 server command and control channels, either exfiltrate data or further download data tools and things like that. So you will need to come out on the network and do those transactions. There's no other way around it. So again, I have my Kibana dashboards here, and I have an arsenal of those. Again, I'm not doing any setup. This is just Docker Compose up. That's it, done. We got about 28 dashboards in here that are anything from alerts to, you name it, HTTP, TLS, SMB data, whatever Suricata can offer. Got my box in here as well. Pretty nifty tool, also displaying Suricata data. And I was really interested in what this does and how it does things. And usually when I want to learn stuff, I usually open my Hunt dashboard here. In Kibana, and you will receive some errors. Basically, they're just saying, okay, there's no RDP here, and there's no SMB, and there's no SSH, which is fine. There's no problem, but there is some data. And the first thing that actually catches my eye is like, I have these in my flow events. This is just flow data. So this basically packets, byte sizes to server, to client, and all those things that Suricata produces. So not related to alert at all. But as I'm scrolling, down, you can find actually, interesting things, and you can refresh the content. As you move around, you have all sorts of things like DNS, TLS information, anything that's available from that pickup where we downloaded the file. Now, as I said, downloading that obfuscated file is not always going to be stopped because it's not executable when it's downloaded. It's downloaded via HTTPS, and it's actually obfuscated. So you need to actually deobfuscate and then execute it. And something on the machine, on the compromised machine, needs to help that one out. What was interesting to me is like, okay, so what does it happen here? And okay, it's quite obvious that you have already a malicious certificate goes, and that might not be the case always. As I said, sometimes you might have nothing here, or might just have external IP lookup and what's my IP type of queries and searches. And that is pretty interesting, to be very honest, because when we're looking at that pickup alone, it's very easy to understand what happened, especially with the background that we have now. But when you're looking at 10 million events per day, it's not that easy to figure out what happened, not at all. Or 10 million alerts and 1 billion other events that Suricata produces. Because Suricata, only between 5 and 10% of all the data that Suricata produces is alerts. The rest is protocol transaction logs. And as I was looking at it, yeah, okay, we have malicious certificate detected and some IP lookups. And so I came in here and I was like, what's the IP lookup? Okay, so it just seems it's asking what is my IP. status code is 200, and we have the user agent here. So that is interesting part because, okay, you know your network when you're defending it. So one thing to take care of is like, why would you have a client asking another DNS server, not your organizational one, what is their IP? You know, it's not very usual to not use the organizational DNS servers. So that's one thing that you can actually do when defending the network. So that could raise attention. But as I was scrolling down, all right, so something pretty interesting. The TLS certificate name that is so well known, it's actually typical for things like that, and it is very suspicious. This one is already red listed. Now, what is interesting is the server name identification, or actually the TLS information. We did HTTPS pull of that file, remember? So when I click and go to VirusTotal to check it out, is .website, okay? As you can see, it's not really red listed anywhere. So because that's something new. But the fact that it's not red listed anywhere here doesn't actually mean necessarily that it's clean. Not at all, because actually, if you hover over on the providers, you see that this is actually the public free data that they're sharing. Most of these providers, all of these providers, they have a private or paid services that they have much more data in there. So you're only looking at the public or the free public data, and that's not complete, not at all. But what was interesting to me as well is that it's kind of a young domain, 3 months old. It's not like it's been there for 10 years or 5 years or whichever. So it's a pretty young kind of generating domain, and not so common maybe to see inside the organization. So that's another thing to hold on. What kind of domains are kind of newly registered or young in seen in the enterprise that haven't been seen, for example, yesterday, and all that stuff. So that was interesting. I looked at the details. I looked some of the relationship. As you can see, it's not really anything red listed there highlighting it that is bad, and it's normal, especially when we're looking at new things like that and trying to figure out things. So then another catch that caught my eye was actually the user agent here, and that's kind of pretty short for a normal user agent in general, because usually the browser that you use or the laptop or the organizational laptops, the user agent string looks quite a bit more different than this one. So I was looking at that and I'm like, it would be nice actually if I can figure out a way to just create some sort of filter set to highlight that for me. There's many ways to do it. One is via filter set here. The other one is in Kibana or whatever, Elasticsearch, Splunk. That there's plenty of opportunities there that Suricata data is digested, so you can actually look at things like that, or patterns or similar. So I was like, let me try to actually excuse me, come up with something interesting. So what I did for this particular case, and something that you can take home, for example, we could just yield interesting results, is I actually created an Elasticsearch filter out of here. And my Elasticsearch filter was kind of pretty simple. So I said, I need to tell it, I want to search for HTTP user agent that you see on the network here that are alerted that are actually smaller in size. So I came up with this query in here, which is kind of looks like that. So in other words, it's saying remove all HTTP user agents that are above 55 characters and more. Just remove them out of my view currently at the moment. And then that gives me still the same result. But on a busy network, when you have lots of these, and trust me, we have organizations that we're working with, they're in the millions here in a day. So it's not 7, it's millions. So that becomes a little bit more challenging to figure out easy things that you see here right now. So then what I said, well, actually, let me zoom in on protocol and just make sure there is a user agent there. So I'm just going to do something like that. Now I got something I can work on. Now, basically, I'm saying I just want to see short or anything smaller than 50, 55 characters, HTTP user agent strings. And I can now actually that's my kind of my hunting filter. So I can go and click save and say share it, and you can say HTTP user agent smaller than 55 characters. The number of characters is relevant, just highlights, here in this case, something that is not very usual, traditional for to have that in the network. You can put your description here so it's safe. So now actually I have that in my global filter set, something that I created personally for this hunt. And it's actually an interesting way to highlight stuff like that. Of course, tactics always change, so you have to keep on top of it. But the combination here of like an unusual user agent with an IP lookup that it does not use the DNS on my organization is kind of something that I would like to know, or at least the occurrence of it in the network I'm defending. And as you can see, Suricata gives a pretty abundant data of payloads, printable metadata about the HTTP transaction, the actual HTTP transaction, the full HTTP transaction itself, and similar. So this is basically part of the of just a very small example you can take away home with the hunting strategy here. As I mentioned, we got eBox, we got eBox here, and there is a abundance of information here, and it can actually, it's very easy to jump from one from one tool to another. So because as I was browsing down here, this is the flow records actually, and let me see if it is going to come up here somewhere. I was looking for where is it? That was just as Josh was doing it. I was looking at maybe I can't find it, but I was interested in. You can see the flow bytes to client and the flow agent, similar things. So this is something. This is something that is you can easily see when you're researching smaller PCAPs, and something useful to come up, let's say with maybe with a formula or something like that. Then you can easily just actually if you want to find out what's that, you can just click in here and have a look on VirusTotal, or you can actually jump from here on to Evebox and be like, what's going on here, and this is actually the interesting part here is that, as you can see, this number here is a flow ID native for Suricata. It was done a long time ago in a PR by Victor Jordan, I think 2014, if I'm not mistaken with the date. So what all these records have in common is they're sharing the same flow ID. So in other words, and as you can see here, this is a good example. There's no alert here. So this is basically a file transaction, HTTP transaction, file transaction, a couple of those. They all share part of the same flow because they are part of this very same flow. So a very easy way to actually jump around and see what's up. So you have domain names here. There's a couple more interesting sounding ones. And, we have our TLS domain in here that was interesting in, and you may or may not have information on Mail visualization. It just depends on the type of traffic that you're looking at. But actually being able to deobfuscate, detonate, and see what happens on the network, you at least get a vision, a portion of what that malware at this specific stage is doing and can do, and therefore kind of try to deduct some sort of a traffic analysis formula that you can apply. And again, this is part of my job daily, both at Stamus and the Suricata team, is to actually find out and know what Suricata cannot do in order to improve it. So that is a big point. And in a lot of cases, you're dealing with unknowns. And this is one way how to figure out, kind of highlight unknowns or unusual stuff on the network. So I just wanted to kind of really briefly, shortly, as you can see, here's our data that we pulled out. That was the transfer of just regular data and Microsoft updates and similar things. And it's okay. Some of these will be empty just because there's not that type of traffic is not there, RDP or SMB. And that's quite okay. And this is what I wanted to share. Just a few useful things. Actually, this is what we wanted to share with Joseph. A few useful things of sometimes what we do at 1 a.m., type of thing, so to speak.
Yeah.
Josh, back to you. Anything I might have missed or any questions that you might
Well,
have? Sorry.
we're obviously going over our hour. I think we caution that. So certainly,
sorry.
if you need to drop, we totally understand. But I think there's a little bit more in that directory.
I guarantee.
Let
There's a
me
bunch of
just
stuff there, actually.
let me just
So this is
move my
just
screen.
one. You got something else to show?
Yeah, sure.
All right.
So can you see my screen?
Yeah, I see it.
Okay, so this is one other. So again, in this case, there's looks like there's multiple PE files. And these smaller things, I don't know. They might be PowerShell scripts or something. I haven't looked at those yet. But sometimes you get a sample like you saw there, and it's very clear what it's doing. Sometimes it's a lot less clear. You might actually find different families on the host as well. So I just grabbed this bnx.txt. Again, the file size here is something that is of interest. Downloading that, it was the same exact recipe, reverse base64, and then decode it. Adding that to a sandbox, we find that this one has a pretty clear tag from Triage, Quasar, Venom client. And what really, these tags, while I think, from my experience, they're usually really fairly accurate. When maybe it's not always 100%, but when I see something like the config extraction, and that's something that Triage is, I think they're really one of the only ones that does that. Well, there's the open source Cape if you want to look at that, but as far as a commercial sandbox, they have the config extractor. So when they tell me they've got a successful config extraction from a payload, I'm much more confident that it is in fact the Quasar. So Venom client, that's actually, it looks like the botnet tag. So here we can see it is from the family Quasar, and then it pulls out all of the important bits from that configuration. So think about software. Software will have config files oftentimes, so that you can customize it for the environment that it's in. Well, malware is no different. So here you can see that information, and in particular, you can see the C2 node. So maybe we throw this in a sandbox, and now we'll also see connections to the C2 node. Maybe we won't, right? There might be some anti-analysis in the malware that prevents it from doing that. Maybe it's a timing thing. It's hard to say. I did throw this in any run, and you can see, this is my results, isn't it? Yeah. You can see there's quite a bit of process activity, kind of a ridiculous amount. It scrolls all the way down and then goes way off the screen here. So that's a bit silly.
A lot of movement.
But yeah, but there's no threats, there's no DNS requests, there's no connections, there's no tags. So from anyone's perspective, this is a suspicious binary, but it can't really help us connect any of those dots. We don't have any network activity, so the network side of things is not helping us identify what type of malware that this is. In this case, Triage is really doing us a great service because it really nailed it. Now, let's just say that Triage did not help with that. One other platform that I like to use is Integer. Again, this is a freemium model in that they have a free plan that you can sign up for and use it to make your submissions are all public. And then there's of course some limitations, but it does a. I think maybe I have to be logged in. Well, let's do that real quick.
I hope you're not putting your password on that open directory. I'm only joking.
Yeah. I'm desensitized to it all. It's a Linux host, so the odds of anything executing on it are quite minimal. Yes, you're right, though. Typically, I don't cross the streams, to quote the Ghostbusters, but in this case, for the demo, I'm going to do that. So what's interesting about this, I mentioned earlier, sometimes you just have to get a little bit into the code, into the artifacts to maybe do some identification. You maybe have your own Yara collection of Yara rules or other signatures that can help. But what this is doing is really meant to be designed at a code level. So we have these executable files, and they're binary content. And so how do we unravel that? You got to look for tools like IDAPRO or Ghidra. Maybe it's a bytecode, so it's a Java app. So there's Java decompiler or .NET decompilers. But it gets to be a lot more challenging. And what this platform is doing is it's just has a collection of what they call genes, which I suspect to be sequences of bytes or sequence of disassembled code that they've classified from previous samples. And now they compare that to the sample that we've just uploaded. So you can see that even though it's not done analyzing, it's already our leading candidate here is that it's Quasar rat. And so that's quite helpful. Packing is an issue, and it tries to deal with packing. That is, taking the malware and hiding it inside of another program so that when you deliver that, the unpacking thing runs and then it unpacks the actual malware. That helps to disrupt our detection and analysis capabilities. So it tries to do some dynamic analysis to get things in memory and all that. So again, not 100%. I don't think I've ever come across anything that's 100%. But this certainly helps me if I run into an executable that I'm just not getting good signatures on, and I'm not willing to commit the time to really start to dig into it. So this kind of exhausts my open source and free toolkit. But again, you can already see a pretty good match. That was the only other thing.
So that was an abundance of stuff in there. To be very honest, a bunch of different stuff in there.
Yeah, and maybe with this, with our triage results, we might have gotten a little more. So you can see we've got all that process activity. Looks like a lot of PowerShell, so it seems to be softening the system.
So scheduled task, net shelling,
yeah.
They're just trying
and
to
then
figure out where
here's we got a little better traffic on this one as well. So this is pretty interesting. There's an IP check as you were talking about earlier. There's the DNS for that C2 node, and then it's getting this content from
it looks bizarre.
raw.github user content, and I don't.
That's interesting. Yeah.